Hi guys, welcome back to Status of the Nation. As per usual, we break down some of the biggest stories that have been happening in this country and abroad, and we just discuss them for a little bit. Just a small disclaimer, if at any point in the video I look slightly gray, that's because it's kind of gray outside and I use natural light to shoot my videos. Like, I just have my curtains open type of thing. So if I come across as gray, that's really the reason why. Anyway, let's get into the biggest stories that have been happening in the Republic. The very first thing we want to talk about is the land debate. So I'm sure you guys are aware that sometime last week, the various political parties gathered in Parliament to basically have a debate on the whole land redistribution issue. And the one that was tabled was land expropriation without compensation. Now, obviously the debate kind of ended how a lot of people thought it was going to end, but I want to discuss why that entire debate, in my opinion, was a big win for the EFF. So Julius Malema, obviously representing the EFF, basically told the House that they support, the motion of land expropriation without compensation. They even went as far to say that they will give the 6% to the ANC 62% that will allow them to amend the constitution. It's section 25 of the constitution that they're basically talking about. And they said that they will put forth their 6% combined with the ANC 62 to change the constitution. Now, the reason why they were even saying that they would combine with the ANC 62 is because in the week, Zuma basically said that, the ANC or he supports the expropriation of land without compensation. Now, the reason why this was a win for the EFF, obviously, it didn't go their way, but the reason why this was a win is because, in my opinion, when Julius heard of this, they thought, okay, let's see if the ANC is really going to be what they say they're about. Because what they essentially did is that they backed the ANC into a corner to say that, what, we agree with you. Also, here's our 6% so we can amend this section of the constitution. And the ANC did what the EFF knew that they were going to do, which was basically to say, no, we don't support this or whatever. The reason why it's a tactical win, because it shows people, what the ANC is all about, is that they'll say one thing, but they'll act in another way. A part of me honestly does believe that the EFF knew that they weren't going to win, but they wanted to do it to prove a point. And that's something that very few people realize about the EFF, is that a lot of the things that they do, it isn't necessarily because they believe they'll win right there and then, but it's because of the bigger point that they're trying to make. Now, the ANC's Phumzile Ngwenya basically said that, they don't support what the EFF is talking about because expropriation without compensation would go against the constitution and go against ANC policy. She also then went on to say that, when we talk about the whole land issue, it must be for the public's interest and not, to benefit the EFF, and their political interest. Now, like I said before, this is what makes, the EFF strategic. A part of me also believes that maybe another reason why the ANC wouldn't vote with them is because you have to remember that when the EFF kind of came into power, their biggest thing was land. And if the ANC were to partner with them in this particular one, it would almost be a win for the EFF, because we would always remember that they're the ones from the very beginning who've been, championing this whole thing of land redistribution. So maybe the ANC not wanting to support them was like, what, if we do this, maybe they believe and agree in principle, but they thought if we do this, it's going to be a win for the EFF, and they don't want that, they can't have that. So obviously the EFF lost the motion. There were 261 votes against and 33 votes for. I'm assuming the 33 votes obviously were from the EFF. The DA and all the other parties, they're not about that. And of course, members of the EFF were not happy, and they had no problem, letting it be known on social media why they're not happy. And again, in terms of the bigger picture, I see what they're doing. I see what it is that they're trying to call out, and I can't fault them because it's actually pretty smart. So we're going to talk about the whole SASSA debacle and Bathabile Dlamini and the Treasury and what that entire drama is about. So a couple of weeks ago, when I made one of the Status of the Nation videos, I had recorded something about this. And at that point, I decided not to include it because I just felt like I didn't have enough information, and also because I felt like it was a progressing story. It just wasn't enough for me to put it in there. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to insert the clip now. It wasn't included in the State of the Nation. I took it out. So I'm going to include it in this video just to give you a brief intro about what this whole drama is about. So speaking about Praveen, he's having some issues with the Minister of Social Development, Bathabile Dlamini. And really their issue comes down to the payment of social grants. So payments of social grants have been going through CPS. CPS is Cash Paymaster Services, and they've basically been in charge of paying out social grants. Now, the issue between the two is that the contract for that ends on the 31st of March, right? So now Praveen has basically suggested that the payment of social grants be done so through banks and postal offices. So this is basically causing big issues between Bathabile and Praveen, because this means that it could jeopardize, people receiving their payments once CPS, goes out on the 31st of March. Now, Bathabile has basically said that to want the banks and the postal service to do this is impractical. And her reasoning, I almost kind of understand where she's coming from, because her reason is first off to say that if you want it to be paid through banks, she feels like it's driven by profit, because that means that everybody has to go open up banks, and banks carry with them bank charges. And she feels like it's unfair for beneficiaries to have to deal with bank charges, right? So what we know about this whole drama right now is that there isn't a solution. I mean, the 31st of March is quickly approaching, and as it stands, there isn't a solution about how they're going to go about making these payments come the end of the month, or rather come the 1st of April. There isn't a plan, and people are nervous, rightfully so, because there doesn't seem to be any direction about how this is all gonna go down. So basically, SASSA filed papers, to basically say that they're not going to be, reaching out to the court in the negotiation process. The thing is, it was in 2014, I believe, that the Constitutional Court basically ruled that the contract that was issued to CPS was invalid and unlawful. So that's basically what the disagreement is about. So on Thursday, there was an affidavit that was completed by SASSA to basically say that, Bathabile and Praveen Gordhan are basically in negotiations, and they're going to figure this whole thing out. I mean, it later went on to say that they are, busy with their communications, and what, guys, is going to be an answer for all of this. The problem is, on Friday, the National Treasury released a statement to basically say that they don't know what they're talking about, because as far as they're aware and as far as they're concerned, they haven't been part of any types of negotiations. So what the statement basically says is that whatever CPS and SASSA and Bathabile Dlamini are doing, they're doing it on their own, because the Treasury hasn't been involved, and that is a problem. And that's going to be difficult if you consider the fact that SASSA basically said that they don't need the court involved in their negotiation, and Treasury saying that they won't support or approve unless the Constitutional Court is involved. Like, I don't know, but I read somewhere that the Constitutional Court is basically saying that on 15th of March, SASSA and all the various parties need to come together to have a solution. I already feel like the 15th of March is cutting it really, really close to the time for when this contract expires. And because up until this point, there isn't a solution. No one has a plan of how this thing is going to work moving forward. I mean, I read somewhere in the news that they're considering using cash trucks as a way of making the payments, and I'm like, I feel like that's how you know that they're literally clutching at straws, because that doesn't make any sense to me, especially from like a security point of view. When people talk about grants, especially when it comes to the elderly and disabled, people always talk about security, and issues of violence, and having their money taken from them. So the idea that cash trucks are gonna come to make these deliveries makes no sense to me, because where's the safety in that? Where's the security? People aren't going to be protected. I mean, the cash trucks themselves aren't going to be protected, in my opinion. So this was even suggested, why it was even a thought to say, hey, let's use cash trucks, makes absolutely no sense to me. But again, it just proves that at this point, they're just clutching at straws and hoping to come with a solution, because they have no idea what they're going to do. Then, of course, this happens. The DG resigns. Apparently the CEO is sick, or there's something wrong with him. And then today, being Sunday, Bathabile had a press conference, and in that entire press conference, she wouldn't answer questions about why the DG resigned. She wouldn't answer questions about the CEO. She wouldn't even give answers about what's going to happen in terms of payments on the 1st of April. All she would say is that, payments are going to be unaffected. People will receive their money on the 1st. And she was talking about how, when the media is talking about this, they're making it look like it's a crisis, but it really isn't. My problem is that it really is a crisis. 17 million people are going to be affected by this. Like, I feel like she almost doesn't get how big this is. We're not just talking about 3 people, and even if we were, there still needs to be a solution. And it's not enough to say, oh, the media is making it look like it's a crisis, whatever. You guys aren't even telling us how you're gonna solve this. Let me put it to you like this. The reason why people are uneasy, the reason why people are nervous is because the very people who are supposed to have an answer, the very people who are supposed to have a solution, have nothing to say. You're the minister. It is your responsibility to give answers. So what sense is it to go to a press conference and when people ask you, minister, what are you going to do? What is the way forward? You don't answer them. Like, what sense is that? That's why people are going to panic. That's why people are going to be nervous, because this is a big deal and there doesn't seem to be an answer. To be quite honest, the ANC doesn't need this type of problem. The ANC doesn't need for March to end and April to start and people are without their grants. They do not want this problem, so they need to fix it. And they need to stop being so defensive when people ask them legitimate questions about what are you going to do next. So let's talk about this tender that was awarded. So the tender was awarded to Net1 UEPS Technologies, I think that's what it is, and CPS is a subsidiary of them. Now, from my understanding, the way this tender was awarded ultimately to them is that when they were putting forth their proposal, one of the big things that SASSA put across was, fraud issues, that people are putting across fraudulent claims and, people who shouldn't be getting grants are getting grants. So one of their big thing was biometrics. So Net1 was basically like, you know what, we've got the biometrics, we know what we're doing, we can fingerprint, we can do all of these fun things. The thing is, closer to the cut-off of the deadline of when the tender was due, SASSA changed the requirements of the tender. So initially, the whole biometric thing was, preferred. It was like, we would really prefer this. Then it became mandatory. And when it became mandatory, Net1 was the only one who basically had the type of technology that they were looking for. Because Net1 was also talking about how, they'll have voice recognition and all of these different things. So when the rules were changed, that's what led the Constitutional Court to basically say that the contract is invalid. I believe it was Judge Frontman, I hope I'm saying that correctly, who basically said that, because the rules were changed, it kind of like kept everyone else out from bidding and essentially picked a winner by default. So that's really what the issue was with how this tender was awarded. So at this point, this is kind of where we are. SASSA doesn't have a plan, but Tabilo won't tell people what's going on, and the Treasury is saying we weren't involved, we haven't been involved. So I feel like this is a problem, especially because grants are important. I saw this, someone shared this on Twitter, and it was basically data from last year when they were showing where a bulk of the money goes. People are buying food, notwithstanding maybe like fees or whatever else that they're doing. Like, people need grant money. So my thing is they need to solve this quickly, and whatever personal issues they have, I hope this doesn't interfere with them trying to find a solution. Anytime things like this happen in the Republic, the outcry is always like, yeah, that person must resign or whatever. I believe it was Kosatu that was calling for Batabile to resign, and I, for one, don't agree. And the reason why I don't agree is because she created this, so she needs to stay there and fix it. What good is it to say she must resign? After she resigns, then what? The problem is still there. Like, the problem still isn't fixed. People still don't know what's going to happen. So my thing is, because she was there when this mess was created, she needs to be there to fix it. I feel like it's getting so easy lately. You do something and the very first thing we say is resign. No, you stay there and you fix it. Like, there's no accountability. There are no consequences. It's the same thing that happened at the hospital. Like, are you guys aware that in 2012, the Department of Health was told that, you guys might want to do some repairs on this hospital because, we're not quite sure what's going on. Nothing happened. They did nothing about that. Now, that the hospital is collapsed and people are injured, and now it's let's do inquiries. Let's find out who didn't do what they were supposed to do. Yeah, that person must resign. But there's going to be no accountability. It makes no sense, and it's one of the things that consistently frustrates me about what happens in the Republic. So Donald Trump delivered his first address on the Hill, and the comments were very like, oh, he's very presidential, and people were like, oh, he was so calm, and all of these different things. I was like, okay, that's fine. I mean, a lot of people said that, and then you also had a lot of people who were not impressed. But the thing that stood out for me in the entire speech is some of the claims that he was making, which have obviously come out to be false. And people have fact checked it. So, you know, all the Trump supporters, just go, you'll see there's been fact checking, and most of the stuff that he said in there was not true. But again, who cares about the truth, right? Trump has bigger problems, to be quite honest, you know, aside from that speech. So I don't know if you guys are aware, but there's a guy called Jeff Sessions. And Jeff Sessions is Attorney General of the United States. That's basically like the government's lawyer. And he has gotten himself into a bit of trouble. And the trouble is basically that it has come out that he committed perjury during his confirmation hearing by not disclosing meetings and conversations and possible Russian ties when he was asked all of this. Now, officials are basically saying that, you know, Jeff didn't consider it relevant when lawmakers were asking him, and he also doesn't remember what he spoke to the Russian ambassador about. I mean, his spokesperson basically came out and said, you know what, guys, it's not that big of a deal, you know, and he didn't mislead anyone. I have to say I disagree. I mean, you get asked the question very directly. Have you spoken to these people? Have you had any contact? And the very first thing you say is no. That's misleading because you didn't tell the truth. And obviously, since this whole thing has come out, a number of Democrats have basically called for him to resign. I believe it was Franken who basically said that he believes that Jeff cannot act in good faith and cannot be basically objective. You know, if the Department of Justice and the FBI is investigating Trump for his Russian ties, that time he also has these Russian ties, you know. So the whole thing obviously looks a bit dodgy. The truth of the matter is that this Russia thing is not going anywhere. It's not gonna go away, you know. And honestly, Trump could just tell the truth. Okay, that was silly. Of course he's not gonna do that. But the thing is, it's not gonna go anywhere. And it seems like a lot of, you know, his staff is falling by the wayside, you know, because of these Russian ties, you know. So besides that, he's out here now tweeting about Barack Obama. And he basically said this. So Trump is of the opinion that Barack Obama, you know, was wiretapping him and had him under surveillance, you know, while he was running, whatever. I just have two questions, really. One, why is this man still tweeting from his personal account? I was under the impression after he became president that the account would be shut down and that he would tweet, you know, from the account of the president of the United States. Because the thing is, for as long as he's tweeting as himself, he's liable. Secondly, he says all of this, but he doesn't have the receipts. Like, as soon as he said this, everyone was literally like, you are saying this, but you have nothing to back it up with. I mean, even Obama's own people, you know, had to come out and be like, we don't know what this man is talking about, and we're not going to get involved with any investigations that the Department of Justice is doing. I feel like what Trump doesn't realize is that when a warrant is issued for tappings and things like that, that is an investigation that's done by the Department of Justice and the FBI. It isn't Barack Obama just going into the office, you know, and putting little bugs in his phone and following him around. That's not how it works. So everybody's sitting here to say that if you're saying that Barack Obama is the one who's tapping your phones, where's the proof? Like, where are the receipts? You know, and the thing is, if the Department of Justice and the FBI have been tapping his phone, all of this stuff is gonna come out when they do put up a case against him anyway, you know. And I'm like, again, people are bothering Obama, and he's out here, you know, on holiday, eating ice cream. I saw him on stage, like, dancing to soca music. He's having the time, and he couldn't be bothered. A part of me thinks, though, that it's his way of setting up to explain to his supporters maybe why he hasn't been doing that well. I mean, his approval numbers are the lowest that they've ever been. You know, it's a historic low. But when he was asked, you know, how he would rate himself, he said that he would give himself an A for achievement, but a C for messaging, because he feels like he's done a lot of great things for the American people, just hasn't been communicated clearly. He also said that he'd give himself an A for effort, which, sure. I mean, why not? But again, I feel like all of this is kind of to distract people from the fact that he hasn't been doing well, and now his supporters are going to take this and be like, yeah, well, you know, they're tapping his phones and they're doing this and this, and I'm like, the reality also is that, like, he needs to be focusing on other things. You know, he's got other things going on that he should be focusing on, rather than talking about how Barack Obama is sneaking into Trump Towers to tap his phones. Also, really quickly, a couple things to talk about. Helen Ziller said this, which I honestly don't know what she's talking about. I read the whole thing and I still have no idea what it is that she's trying to say. I'm just very confused. I'm sure you guys are aware that Thabo Mbeki has been appointed as UNISA Chancellor, my president. Very, very cool. Somalia is experiencing a severe drought. Like, people have already died in a very, very short space of time. So, you know, prayers up to the people in Somalia, and I hope that this drought ends quickly and that, you know, as few people are affected as possible. Last thing really quickly is that our state minister said that the government could start to regulate the internet, and David basically said that this is because of all the fake news and all of the different things that float around on social media. He even went as far as to say that revered democracies around the world do this all the time, and the one that I can think of is China. I wouldn't exactly call China a democracy. I don't know. But he said it in a press conference to basically say that, you know what, it's on the table. I don't know what that means or what that's going to look like, but that's what he said. But yeah, guys, that was the status of the nation. Thank you again for watching. Please make sure you thumbs up this video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Let me know what you guys think, and thanks for watching. Bye.